I'm not a life coach. I'm not a therapist. I'm a mom. My name is Ina Irby. I have a bone to pick when it comes to the broadcasting. I always tell you I'm not scripted. What I say is what comes from my heart at the time that I'm actually talking to you. And when it comes to scripts, it just, you can see it in the broadcasting. When they pan out and they go and they talk to certain individuals. And for instance, May's broadcasting where they interviewed African American couples. My experience as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the South, because we lived in the South, we lived in Washington, D.C., was very different from what the experiences were that when they were interviewing the African American couples. I found that in my congregation, I went to Alexandria South and North congregation. Alexandria South and North and South. And I didn't feel that closeness. I am a mixed race couple. My husband and I are mixed race. I'm Mexican and my husband is white. Now, I don't really fit in with the Mexicans because I don't speak Spanish. So I never went to the Spanish congregation. I'm not a fluent Spanish speaker. Before I moved to Virginia, I came from California. I didn't know anything about segregation. I didn't understand it. And I had been told by my mother that she didn't want me to have a Spanish accent. And so she didn't teach me Spanish. And that was her reasoning, that she just wanted me to have a good job in California. It was very prejudice in California. And the prejudice that ran in California, from what I heard from other friends in the congregation, was very quiet. And I was in a predominantly African American congregation. Now, in my growing up, I would say African American, the term African American is fairly new. I mean, we used to call, I remember growing up saying black, white, and, brown, black, white, and brown, and Chinese, but everybody was Chinese. They didn't have a category. They didn't understand that Chinese could mean Korean. It was just a different time period. So I grew up in a predominantly African American congregation. And in California, the hurt and the pain that was from segregation didn't seem to be as prominent in the congregation. But there was still a tinge of white versus African American. I mean, you could still feel it. It didn't feel comfortable inside the congregation with all white people. I never felt that. I never felt comfortable. In Tustin congregation was predominantly white congregation in Orange County. Growing up, the Tustin congregation, and that did not feel good. I did not like going to that congregation and not like visiting that Kingdom Hall. And I don't think we ever really did. We always stayed in a predominantly African American congregation, that's where I felt at home. And I was treated kindly by all the friends. They just loved me. I mean, Grandma Johnson. Oh, I love Grandma Johnson. Grandma Johnson was my grandma. I mean, I love Grandma Johnson. She loved everybody. And she was integral in my, growing up as a, quote, pioneer in the congregation. Okay, so jump over to the East Coast. I went to a congregation where I felt a lot of and saw an elder's wife, particularly one particular elder's wife, was very angry, always very angry. She was African American, and she explained I didn't know, I had no clue that there was segregation inside the organization. And then my white mother-in-law, because my husband is white, has a new husband, And he was explaining how the congregation, he's like a third generation or fourth generation, how many years you can be. When the organization first started, his parents were in the organization during the first presidency in the organization. I always get that mixed up. I think it's Russell or Rutherford, right? Or Russell. Oy, all this ridiculous white presidents, mind you. He explained that there was segregation in the Kingdom Hall, and that one African American sister, I could tell, was still very hurt because of that, and the segregation that was in the DC area. I could feel the pain still very much in the congregations between the white and the African American friends, and they were integrated in Alexandria South, but there was still problems. I could tell when, for instance, one sister got counseled on her hair, and she was African American, and her hair, another thing on those broadcasting, you always see, African Americans with straight hair. That is not natural, people. Everybody, they have a curl. They have a curl to their hair. So that generally means that they had to put chemicals in their hair in order for them to have straight hair. That is hard on a woman's head. Chemicals are not good for hair. So when when someone has naturally curly hair, it can be very dangerous to continue to put chemicals on their hair. And one sister wanted to just put, she had beautiful, beautiful hair. And she had the really stiff curls, and she would just like turn the curls and just make it just like beautiful all the way around. Other sisters, when they got counseled, especially when they would go on the meetings and give their parts. And that was so unfair because it was usually a white brother that was giving the counsel on their hair. And I didn't even know there was a problem until one sister kind of said, yeah, I got counseled. I'm like, what for? Well, my hair. And she didn't even curl it. She just left it kind of poofy. And she explained to me, I can't do the chemical thing. It's making my hair fall out. And I felt so sorry for her. And when you braid your hair as well, if the braids are too tight, you have to, you will get spots from getting your hair pulled constantly. So braiding isn't always the wise thing to do either. Your hair has to just be natural. And I remember that it was paining. It pained me to hear it when that sister was explaining what was happening in the congregation, that there was actually controversy about how their hair was, what they look like up on stage. So no, there's still hurt, and I think that's just our sinful nature. There will always be hurt from different races. You will always be hurt somehow. I didn't even understand that there was segregation until I moved to the DC area. I realized that I was not white. And I would tell my husband, look, if you want good treatment, you better go to the store and get what you want. But if I go in there, they're not going to treat me that way. And I could feel that. I usually gravitated to the Ethiopian population or African American population, Cuban. There was lots of Cubans back east, not Mexicans. You don't really find a lot of Mexican food, and not the way that they cook here in California. Yeah, so scripted. And if you really have a heart to heart, there's a really good friend of mine here in South County. I love her. and I miss her. And yeah, she's not treated right by the white friends in her congregation. She raised two good men, two good young boys, and they both are not baptized Jehovah's Witnesses. And it's just her and her husband. They no longer live in the community. They no longer live in the area. They moved towards Temecula. I call it Temecula, but it's hot over there in Temecula. And she is Ebony, as Ebony comes, and she has cried many times because she was not treated fairly by the elders in her congregation. And so I think that it's important for Jehovah's Witnesses to hear that in all of the world, that not everyone, what you see on a broadcasting and what actually happens in a smaller community in a congregation is very different. And that is very normal, but that's very honest. You know, that is because we come with all our baggage on what somebody looks like. And if you're not a certain color, and it happens in my community as well, Mexicans. If you're a dark Mexican, if you come from Mexico, my grandmother would call them. My grandmother was Mexican, but she was born and raised here in California. And she would call the Mexicans that came from Mexico wetbacks. That's what they call them, wetbacks. So, I mean, you're still finding, even within the community, racial bias in the congregations. It doesn't matter where, it's something that will always be. And I think it's very unfair that the organization portray this, oh, we all get along, and it's the same. It's the same. I think it's very unfair that the organization claim that somehow their minds and hearts were open way before the segregation ended, and that they had Jehovah's blessing and opened up the kingdom halls, and there's peace and unity there, when I know for a fact that there isn't peace and unity there. And now I think even more so. Obviously, the money issue being a certain category of having a certain wealth and then not having a certain amount of wealth in the congregation. There was so many different things that when I looked at Goat-like, and I like him, and he's in an all-white area pretty much. I mean, there isn't a whole lot of black people where he lives. I mean, Goat-like, there's not a whole lot of African-American people that live with the goats and in the snow. Yeah, no. So I like him. He's very honest. I like his activism. I like his honesty. I like that he's not 100% scripted. He has some things he wants to say, but he's not, you can see all the you-knows and the ums and the, yeah. I just want you to know that it's not what they say. And if you're worried that you're sitting alone thinking, that's not what I saw in a congregation, or am having some problems in the congregation. Yeah, it's because there are real problems that they're not addressing. And don't get sucked in by that, thinking that what you're going through that's making you crazy isn't really happening when it is. All right. I hope this helps you on your healing journey. Just to know that I said something that maybe might have struck a chord. I hope it helps you. So, follow your bliss and be good humans.